My name is Cynthia, and I'm what you might call a founding mother of the Grace Point Community Chapel. My late husband, Robert, and I were there when it was just 20 people in a rented school gymnasium, full of faith and flimsy folding chairs. We poured the concrete for the front steps of the building we have now. Robert, a carpenter by trade, built the first pulpit with his own hands, the same one Pastor Elijah stands behind every Sunday. For 42 years, that church hasn't just been a place I go, it's been the bedrock of my life. The family I chose after my own had scattered to the winds. And for 42 years, I have tithed, not just 10% of my income, but my time, my heart, my hope. I thought it was a sacred trust, a covenant between me, my community, and my God. It turns out, for our new pastor, it was just a business plan. Pastor Elijah arrived about 3 years ago, a whirlwind of charisma and dazzling white teeth. He was younger than most of the congregation, in his late 40s, with a modern energy that many found refreshing. He talked about growth, about outreach, about making Grace Point a beacon for the 21st century. At first it was wonderful. Attendance swelled. He was dynamic. His sermons were polished and compelling, and he had a way of making you feel seen. He'd grip your hand after service, look you right in the eye and say, "Cynthia, it is so good to see you. You are a pillar of this house." And like a fool, I believed him. I believed him because I wanted to. I wanted the church Robert and I had given our lives to thrive after we were gone. The shift was subtle at first. The focus moved from community suppers and bake sales for the local shelter to high-gloss marketing campaigns and fundraising drives for upgrades. We needed a new sound system, then a new video projection system, then a new lighting rig for the stage. Each came with a price tag that made my sensible Depression-era parents spin in their graves. But the congregation, swept up in Elijah's vision, always paid. I gave too, though a little less enthusiastically, each time. Robert's pulpit started to look small and plain under all those new stage lights. Then came the Prosperity Project. It was his masterpiece, his grand vision, a new wing for the church, he said, a state-of-the-art youth center, a modern coffee shop for fellowship, counseling suites. He unveiled it one Sunday with a slick video presentation full of architectural renderings and soaring music. It was ambitious. It was also going to cost millions. He announced a 3-year pledge drive, and he wasn't asking for our usual tithes. He was asking for sacrificial giving. He wanted us to dig deep, to pledge amounts that stretched our faith. A few weeks later, the pledge cards went out. I looked at mine, a glossy affair with a picture of the proposed new building shimmering under a perfect sunrise. I live on my late husband's pension and my Social Security. It's enough. I live comfortably, not lavishly. I have a nest egg I guard fiercely, the one Robert and I built for a rainy day. I looked at the pledge card, thought of my budget, and wrote down the same generous amount I had always given. I could afford it. It was significant, but it was not the sacrificial leap of faith Elijah was demanding. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was him. "Cynthia, my friend," he said, his voice smooth as honey. "I was just reviewing the first wave of prosperity pledges, and I was so blessed by your generosity." There was a pause, but I couldn't help but notice it was the same as your regular tithe. I was hoping that a pillar of this church, a woman of your standing and history, might feel called to lead by example, to really step out in faith on this. What he meant was, he'd seen my name on the original donor plaque in the lobby. He knew I was one of the old money families, even if my old money was just a modest, well-tended retirement fund. I kept my voice even. "Pastor, that is the amount I can contribute. It is a significant and prayerfully considered pledge. Another pause. This one cooler. I see. Well, we'll pray that the Lord opens your heart to the possibilities, Cynthia. We'll pray He loosens the grip of fear that can sometimes hold us back from our own blessings. It was a veiled threat, wrapped in the language of piety. Fear. He was calling me fearful. Me, who had nursed a husband through a 2-year battle with cancer without ever losing my faith. I felt a prickle of anger, but I said nothing more than a simple goodbye. That next Sunday was when it began. Elijah stood at that beautiful hand-carved pulpit and delivered a sermon on Matthew 6. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. His eyes seemed to scan the pews and find mine, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. He went on, his voice rising with theatrical passion, about how a spirit of greed, a love of money, could masquerade as prudence. He spoke of those who had been blessed with much in their younger years, but who now, in their later years, clutched their earthly treasures, forgetting their eternal duty. He mentioned how this spirit could take hold of even the most long-standing members, a spiritual rot that could infect the whole body of the church, if not cut out. He never said my name. He didn't have to. Every head of every person in my pew turned, just for a second, to glance at me. My face burned with a shame I did not deserve. It wasn't about the money. It was about the public humiliation, the twisting of scripture into a weapon to shame an old woman into opening her checkbook. That was the moment something in me broke. It was the moment the trust I had placed in that man, in that church, shattered into a million pieces. The week that followed was one of the longest of my life. The coldness was immediate and pervasive. Margaret, who had sat next to me in the alto section of the choir for 20 years, suddenly found a new spot on the other side of the room. David, a deacon who used to joke with me every Sunday about my rose garden, now just gave me a tight, polite nod and hurried past. Phone calls to my usual prayer partners went unreturned. I was being shunned. It was a quiet, suffocating isolation, expertly orchestrated by a man who wielded social pressure like a surgeon's scalpel. I tried to tell myself it was a misunderstanding, that I was being too sensitive. But then came the next Sunday, and the Sunday after that. Each sermon had a new theme, but the undertone was the same. One week it was about the parable of the talents, with a pointed commentary on those who bury what God has given them. He stared right at me when he said it. The next week, it was a sermon on Ananias and Sapphira, the couple in the book of Acts who held back a portion of their money from the church and were struck dead. He actually used the phrase lying to the Holy Spirit and talked about how some people's smiles hide a deceitful heart. My heart wasn't deceitful. It was broken. I sat in my pew, the one Robert and I had claimed all those years ago, and felt like a stranger in my own home. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot stone in my stomach, my breaking point. The moment resolve finally burned through the fog of hurt came not in the sanctuary, but in the church's small, stuffy library. I was there to return a book, trying to keep my head down, when I overheard my dear friend Martha talking with Pastor Elijah. Martha was 82, a widow for the last decade, and living on a meager fixed income. She was the kindest soul I had ever known, a woman who would give you the coat off her back in a blizzard, even if it was the only one she had. I heard Elijah's voice, that smooth, persuasive purr. Martha, your pledge is an inspiration. It shows a level of faith that, frankly, some of our more comfortable members lack. It is a testament to your spirit. And then I heard Martha's voice, thin and worried. Oh, I hope so, Pastor. It's the last of my emergency savings. I had to cash in the last of my husband's old insurance policy. But like you said, We have to trust God to provide, don't we? My blood ran cold. He knew her situation. We all did. The Deacon's Fund had helped her with a plumbing bill just last winter, and he was letting her, no, encouraging her, to liquidate her entire safety net for his glorious prosperity project. He was preying on the most vulnerable, the most faithful, the most trusting members of his flock. It wasn't just about shaming me anymore. This was predatory. This was evil. I fled the library, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in my car's ignition. I drove home, but I didn't go inside. I just sat in the driveway, the engine off, staring at my quiet, empty house, the house Robert and I had filled with so much love and laughter. I thought of his hands, calloused and sure, planing the wood for that pulpit. He had built it as an offering, a place from which the word of God was meant to be spoken, and now it was being used as a platform for a spiritual con man to fleece an 82-year-old widow. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. At that moment, it was about protection. It was about justice. It was about honoring Robert's memory and everything we believed that church was supposed to stand for. I thought of all the years of potluck dinners, of visiting the sick, of holding hands in prayer circles, of the genuine community we had built, and this man was turning it into his personal ATM. That's when I thought of my nephew, Leo, my sister's boy. He was a good kid, sharp as a tack, and a bit of a mystery to the rest of the family. He worked in something he called cybersecurity. To me, it was all just computers and codes, a world I didn't understand. But I knew one thing. Leo found things. He found things that people tried very hard to hide. I finally went inside, my steps firm, my purpose clear. The hurt was still there, a deep, aching bruise on my soul, but now it was overlaid with something else, a cold, hard anger, a resolve that felt like steel settling in my bones. I picked up the phone and dialed. Leo, it's your Aunt Cynthia. I need your help. There's a wolf in my sheepfold, and I need you to find out where he keeps his real treasure. Leo listened patiently on the other end of the line. He'd always been a good listener, a trait he got from his mother. I poured it all out, the new pastor, the prosperity project, the sermons, the shunning, and finally, the conversation I'd overheard with Martha. When I finished, the line was quiet for a moment. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Aunt Cynthia, he said, his voice calm and serious. This sounds bad, really bad. What he's doing, the targeted sermons, the pressure on vulnerable people, like your friend Martha, that's classic psychological manipulation. It's a textbook affinity fraud scheme, just wrapped in a clerical collar. Affinity fraud. The term was new to me, but it felt right. He was exploiting the trust and faith we all shared. What do you need me to do? Leo asked. I took a deep breath. His question made it real. We were crossing a line, and there would be no going back. I need to know where the money is going, Leo. The real money, this prosperity project. It feels wrong. It's too slick, too corporate. The church has a board, but Elijah handpicked the last 3 members. The treasurer, a good man named Albert, was pressured to retire last year. It's all a black box, and Elijah holds the key. I just have this feeling, this deep gut feeling, that the money we're pledging for a new youth center isn't going to buy a single brick. Okay, he said. Here's the thing. I can't just hack into the church's bank account. That's highly illegal, and frankly, unnecessary. People who set up these kinds of schemes, they always leave a trail. They think they're clever, but they get lazy. They have to register things, move money around. The digital world is like a forest floor covered in a fine layer of dust. Every step you take leaves a footprint. We just have to know how to look for them. He started asking questions. What's the official name of the project? The Prosperity Project. I told him. Is it being run through the church's main bank account? I don't know, I said. They set up a special giving portal online and have separate offering envelopes. Perfect, he said, a hint of excitement in his voice. That means it's likely a separate legal entity, a nonprofit, or more likely, an LLC set up to look like one. That's the first place to look. Over the next few days, Leo became my secret co-conspirator. We had hushed phone calls late at night. He started by doing a simple corporate search. Within an hour, he found it. Prosperity Project LLC, registered not in our state, but in Delaware, a state known for its lax corporate disclosure laws. The registered agent was a generic corporate services company, a dead end. He didn't stop there. He explained to me that when you set up a website, you have to register a domain name. The church's new slick giving portal was registered to that LLC. Using a tool he called the Wayback Machine, he could see older versions of the website, and on a version from the first week, it was live. Before they tightened up the security, the administrative contact listed wasn't the generic agent, it was an email address, e.reisner.private@protonmail.com. Elijah's full name was Elijah Reisner. It's a rookie mistake, Leo told me. He probably set it up himself to save a few bucks before he hired a professional to cover his tracks. But the internet never truly forgets. The next footprint was financial. Leo couldn't see the church's accounts, but he explained that any money moving from the church's official name to this separate LLC would have to be documented in the church's annual budget reports, if they were even doing them properly. This is where my own long history with the church came into play. I remembered Albert, the former treasurer, who had been pushed out. I called him the next day. Albert was a gentle, meticulous man in his late 70s. He was wary at first. He'd been hurt by his ousting, and he didn't want any more trouble. But when I told him about Martha and her insurance money, his tone changed. Cynthia, I'm glad you called, he said. His voice low. I've been worried. The way Elijah runs the finances, it's not right. When I was treasurer, we had 3 people sign every major check. Every expenditure was approved by the board and recorded in the minutes. The month before I left, he introduced a new streamlined system where he had sole signatory power over a new ministerial discretionary fund. He said it was for nimble outreach. I argued against it. A month later, he told the board my methods were antiquated and holding back progress. They politely asked for my resignation. Did you ever see any large transfers? I asked. Anything related to the Prosperity Project? He hesitated. The week I left, there was a wire transfer authorization that came across my desk. $50,000. It was seed money, he said, for the initial architectural and legal fees for the project. The beneficiary wasn't a law firm or an architect. It was an LLC. I can't remember the name, but it struck me as odd. I was gone before it was processed. It was all starting to connect. The separate LLC, the private email address, the ministerial discretionary fund. Elijah was building a pipeline, a siphon, to move money out of the church's accounts and into a corporate entity that he alone controlled. The final piece of the puzzle, the most damning one, came from a place Leo called the dark web. It sounded terrifying, but he assured me he was just accessing public records of data breaches. He explained it to me in simple terms. The company in Delaware that Elijah used to register his shell corporation, they had a massive data breach 2 years ago. Hackers stole all their client files and dumped them online. Most of it is junk, Leo said. But these files contain everything. The real names of the people who set up the corporations, their contact information, internal memos, bank account details they used for billing. It's a treasure trove for investigators. He spent a whole night sifting through gigabytes of stolen data. The next morning, he called me. His voice was grim. Aunt Cynthia, I found him. I found everything. He had the original incorporation documents for Prosperity Project LLC. The sole member and manager listed was Elijah Reesner. He had a copy of the application, signed by Elijah, which listed a new bank account that was to be linked to the LLC. The account wasn't in America. It was with a private bank in Geneva, Switzerland, and the document included the account number. But the real bombshell, the piece of evidence that made my breath catch in my throat, was a scanned copy of a recent statement for that Swiss account. It must have been uploaded to the incorporation firm's portal for some reason, a moment of profound carelessness. The statement showed a current balance of just over 1.2 million Swiss francs. It showed 3 recent incoming wire transfers, $50,000 a year ago, another $75,000 6 months ago, and a transfer just last month for over $200,000, all from the Prosperity Project LLC. I sank into my chair, the phone feeling heavy in my hand. He hadn't just been planning this, he had been actively doing it. He was robbing us blind, using our faith and our hope for the future of our church to fund his private European retirement. Every slick video, every passionate sermon, every guilt-inducing glance was a lie, a performance designed to funnel our pensions and our savings into his offshore account. Martha's insurance money was in there. The bake sale money was in there. 42 years of my own tithing, my own legacy, was in there. It was about revenge now. Oh yes, it was about revenge, but it was also about righteousness. It was about taking the stone of truth and shattering the stained glass window of his lies, and I knew exactly how we were going to do it. Leo, I asked, my voice steady now, devoid of any tremor, can you put those bank statements into a slideshow? Something simple, just the documents, one after another, nice and clear. Easy, he said. Why? Because this Sunday, when Pastor Elijah calls for the offering, the screens on either side of the pulpit won't be showing hymns. They're going to show his offshore bank statements. And I am going to sit in the front row and watch the curtain come down on his performance. The plan required a delicate touch. A frontal assault was out of the question. We couldn't just walk into the church office and say, we know what you did. Elijah was too slick, too insulated. He would deny everything, paint me as a bitter, confused old woman, and destroy the evidence before anyone could blink. The church board was packed with his loyalists, men and women so enamored with his charisma that they would have accepted that the sky was green if he said it with enough conviction. No, this had to be a silent takeover, a coup that he wouldn't see coming until the blade was already at his throat. The key was the audio-visual system, the very one he had been so proud of fundraising for a year ago. It was the nerve center of his Sunday morning spectacle. 2 massive projection screens flanked the pulpit, displaying hymn lyrics, scripture verses, and the polished graphics for his sermon series. Gaining control of those screens was gaining control of the narrative. How do we get access, Leo? I asked him during one of our late-night calls. They have a tech team, a couple of young volunteers who run it all. They're fiercely loyal to Elijah. That's our way in, he replied, a strategist calm in his voice. We don't fight them, we join them. Better yet, we make them think they need us. These church systems, they're usually a patchwork, a bit of old tech, a bit of new. I'll bet it's buggy. I'll bet it gives them headaches. He was right. I'd heard the tech volunteers, a pair of earnest young men named Ben and Jerry, complaining in the church coffee shop about the projector freezing or the sound cutting out at random times. Here's the plan, Aunt Cynthia, Leo laid out. You're going to make a donation, a very specific one. You're going to call Pastor Elijah and tell him that, after much prayer, you've realized he's right. The church does need to be ready for the future. And while you can't increase your pledge to the building fund, you want to make a special gift to ensure his message gets out clearly. You're going to offer to pay for a professional to come in and optimize the AV system, and that professional, of course, will be me. It was brilliant. It used Elijah's own arrogance against him. The idea that his most vocal critic had finally seen the light and was now paying to upgrade his stage would be an irresistible ego boost. He wouldn't be able to refuse an offer that validated him so completely. Making that phone call was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I had to swallow my anger, my disgust, and put on the voice of a repentant parishioner. Pastor Elijah, it's Cynthia, I said, my voice carefully measured. I've been doing a lot of praying since we last spoke. Cynthia, he boomed, the feigned warmth returning instantly. I knew the Lord would speak to your heart. You were right, I conceded, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I've been too focused on the past, on the way things were. I want to help the church move forward. I can't change my pledge to the Prosperity Project. My finances just won't allow for it, but I would like to make a special gift. I've noticed the projection system has been having some issues. My nephew works in technology. He's a real expert, and I'd like to pay for him to come in, do a full diagnostic, and fix any problems. A gift, from me, to ensure your sermons are always seen and heard perfectly. The silence on the other end of the line was thick with his satisfaction. I could practically hear him preening. Cynthia, that is the most wonderful news. A true sign of a softened heart. Yes, of course. We would be blessed to have your nephew's expertise. Thank you. Thank you for your obedience to God's calling. Obedience. He was already framing my capitulation as a victory for his divine authority. I hung up the phone feeling sick, but also with a grim sense of triumph. The Trojan horse was at the gates, and he was about to fling them open himself. 2 days later, Leo arrived at the church, dressed in a neat polo shirt and carrying a laptop bag. He looked the part of a competent, friendly tech consultant. Elijah greeted him with a wide, patronizing smile, clapping him on the back. "So you're the wizard," he said. "My aunt speaks very highly of you. This system is my pride and joy, but it can be a bit temperamental." "I can see that," Leo said, looking at the rack of equipment. "You've got a mix of different brands here, and the network configuration is a bit messy. No wonder you're getting glitches." He spent the next 4 hours in the small dark AV booth at the back of the sanctuary. The two young volunteers, Ben and Jerry, watched him with a mixture of awe and suspicion. Leo was masterful. He spoke their language, using jargon I couldn't begin to understand. He showed them a few simple tricks to fix the audio feedback they'd been struggling with. He cleaned up cabling. He won their trust. And while he was doing that, he was performing his real work. He installed a small, innocuous piece of software onto the main presentation computer. He told the volunteers it was a remote diagnostic tool, so he could monitor the system from home and help them if it crashed on a Sunday morning. They thought it was a brilliant idea. In reality, it was a backdoor. It gave him complete, hidden control over everything that appeared on those screens. He could, from his laptop anywhere in the world, override their inputs and display whatever he wanted. As he was packing up to leave, Elijah sauntered over. "Well, is it fixed?" "It's optimized," Leo said with a confident smile. "Should run much smoother for you now, Pastor, and I'll be able to keep an eye on it remotely, just to make sure Excellent, Elijah said. Beaming, tell your aunt her gift is much appreciated. It's amazing what a little faith can do. That Sunday, Elijah seemed to walk with an extra spring in his step. The system worked flawlessly. The sound was crisp. The graphics changed on cue. He delivered another sermon about the importance of giving, this time with a smug little story about a longtime member whose heart had been miraculously opened. He looked directly at me and smiled. I smiled back, a quiet, patient smile that I hoped he would remember later. The congregation, seeing this apparent reconciliation, relaxed. The cold shoulders began to thaw. My return to the fold was a powerful new talking point for him. The pressure on everyone else to give, and give big, intensified. With the trap set, the next phase began. We couldn't just drop the bomb. The fallout had to be controlled. We needed to ensure that when the truth came out, the right people were ready to take charge, to prevent the church from imploding entirely. We needed to save the flock, not just slaughter the wolf. This led me back to Albert, the former treasurer. I met him for coffee, far away from the church. I laid out the whole story, showing him a printed copy of the Swiss bank statement that Leo had found. He stared at it, his face paling. He traced the account number with a trembling finger. I knew it, he whispered. I knew something was rotten. To use the Lord's house like this, it's a desecration. He was heartbroken, but also energized. The meticulous, detail-oriented man who had been pushed aside was now faced with the ultimate vindication of his concerns. "What are you going to do, Cynthia?" he asked. I told him the plan. The screens, the Sunday service. His eyes widened. "That will be chaos. It will be a reckoning," I replied. "And when the chaos starts, the congregation will need a leader. They will need someone with integrity, someone who knows the finances, to step up and restore order. They will need you, Albert." He sat back, the weight of my words sinking in. For a year, he had been sidelined, made to feel irrelevant. Now, I was offering him a path back, not to power, but to service. He was the only one who could credibly lead an investigation and rebuild the financial integrity of the church. After a long silence, he nodded slowly. "I'll be there," he said, his voice firm, "and I will be ready." With Albert on board, I turned my attention to the most important person, Martha. I couldn't let her be blindsided. Her faith was so pure, so genuine. The shock of Elijah's betrayal could shatter it completely if she wasn't prepared. I went to her small, tidy home, the one filled with pictures of her late husband and her grandchildren. I sat with her in the living room, a cup of tea in my hand. "Martha," I began gently, "I need to tell you something about Pastor Elijah and the Prosperity Project, and it's going to be very hard to hear." I didn't show her the bank statements. That would be too brutal. Instead, I told her about the Shell Corporation, the LLC registered in Delaware. I explained how it was a separate company, controlled only by Elijah, and that the money pledged to the project was going there first, not to the church's general fund. She looked at me, her brow furrowed in confusion. "But why? Why would he do that?" "That's the question we need the board to answer," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I just want you to be prepared. There is a possibility, Martha, that the money is not being used for what we were told. I know what you pledged. I know what it cost you, and I think you should hold off on giving any more until we get some clear answers." Doubt began to cloud her gentle eyes, followed by a flicker of fear. She had staked her entire financial security on this man's word. The idea that she had been deceived was a terrifying one. It wasn't about revenge, or even justice, for me anymore. Looking at her face, it was about protecting this dear, sweet woman from ruin. It was about making sure that her faith, the real, honest-to-God faith she lived every day, wasn't collateral damage in Elijah's war on our bank accounts. She didn't agree right away, but the seed was planted. The next day, she called me. "I'm not going to write the next check, Cynthia," she said, her voice small but determined. "Not until I understand." It was a small victory, but a crucial one. A few days later, I quietly had a similar conversation with two other older families, pillars of the church, who I knew had been pressured into making huge pledges. I didn't give them all the details, just enough to sow the seeds of legitimate concern. I spoke of the need for transparency, of the odd corporate structure. I urged them to simply pause their giving and ask the board for a detailed accounting of the project's funds. The effect was subtle, but immediate. Elijah must have been tracking the pledges weekly, because the very next Sunday, there was a new edge to his sermon, an edge of desperation. He preached on the story of the Israelites failing to enter the promised land because of their doubt. He thundered from the pulpit about how a spirit of hesitation and a whispering campaign of doubt could rob the congregation of their miracle. He was no longer just shaming me. He was targeting a nameless, growing group of dissenters. He could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet, but he had no idea it was a full-blown earthquake building just below the surface. His panic was making him sloppy, his accusations more wild. He was alienating the very people he was trying to intimidate. The power was shifting, long before a single image flashed up on those screens. The silent takeover was nearly complete. The final week felt like the eerie calm before a hurricane. I barely slept. I went through the motions of my life, gardening, grocery shopping, talking to neighbors, but my mind was in the AV booth of the Grace Point Community Chapel. My entire being was focused on 11:15 a.m. on the coming Sunday. That was the time the offering was usually taken. That was the time the world would change. Leo and I had one last call on Saturday night. The plan was set. He had the slideshow ready, a simple, brutal sequence of documents. The first slide was the Delaware registration for Prosperity Project LLC, with Elijah Reesner's name clearly listed as the sole member. The second was the application document for the bank in Geneva, with the same name and signature. The third, fourth, and fifth slides were the bank statements, each one showing larger and larger sums of money flowing in, with the grand total displayed in both Swiss francs and US dollars at the bottom. The final slide was just a simple sentence in big, bold letters, "Wherefore by their fruits ye shall know them." Matthew 7:20. "The system is ready, Aunt Cynthia," Leo said. "The moment the offering plates come out, I'll trigger it from my apartment. They won't know what hit them." "Are you sure you're ready for this?" I thought of Martha's worried face. I thought of Albert's quiet integrity. I thought of my Robert, and the pulpit he built with his own hands. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." That Sunday morning, I dressed with deliberate care. I chose a simple navy blue dress, the one I always wore for Christmas Eve service. It felt appropriate. It was, in its own way, a holy day, a day of judgment. I drove to church early and took my usual seat, right in the front pew on the left. I wanted to see his face. The sanctuary was buzzing. Elijah, sensing the dip in donations, had declared this miracle offering Sunday. He had hyped it for weeks. This was supposed to be the day the final massive pledges rolled in, the day his project was fully funded. He was practically vibrating with a greedy, manic energy. The music was louder than usual, the lights brighter. It felt less like a church service and more like a telethon. He took the pulpit, and my heart began to pound against my ribs. He launched into his sermon, a fiery, desperate tirade about legacy and blessing. He talked about the new wing, painting a picture of laughing children and saved souls. He was a master showman. I had to give him that. He was selling a beautiful dream. The only problem was that he was the only one who would be cashing in on it. Then came the moment, and now he boomed, his arms spread wide, a beatific smile plastered on his face. Now is the time for us to act in faith, to bring our gifts to the altar and build a house for generations to come. Ushers, please come forward and receive God's tithes and our miracle offerings. The organ swelled. The four ushers began walking down the aisles with the polished brass offering plates. On the two giant screens, the usual slide, a picture of a praying family with the words "Give cheerfully" was displayed. Elijah stood there, soaking in the moment. He looked out over us, his flock, his marks, and his eyes met mine. He gave me a small triumphant nod, as if to say, "See, you came around. I won." And in that split second, the screens flickered. It happened so fast. One moment, the picture of the praying family was there. The next, it was gone, replaced by a stark, black and white document. The Articles of Incorporation for Prosperity Project, LLC. At first, there was no reaction. The congregation was used to seeing text on the screens. They probably assumed it was a scripture verse, but I saw the flicker of confusion in Elijah's eyes. He glanced at the AV booth at the back, a small frown creasing his brow. Then the slide changed. The Swiss bank application, with his name. Elijah Reisner. A low murmur started in the pews behind me. I could hear people whispering, "What is that?" I saw a few people squinting, trying to read the text. Elijah's smile was gone. His face had gone rigid, a mask of disbelief. He fumbled with his microphone, tapping it as if it were malfunctioning. We seem to be having a technical issue with the projectors," he stammered. "Ben, Jerry, can we get the lyric slide back up, please?" But the slide changed again. This time it was the first bank statement. The incoming wire transfers. The balance. Over $1 million. A gasp went through the sanctuary. It was audible, a collective intake of breath. The murmuring grew louder. People were turning to each other, pointing at the screens. Someone in the back shouted, is that his name?" Elijah's face was ashen. The blood had drained from it completely. He looked like a statue. He stared at the screen, then his eyes darted around the room, wild and panicked. He looked like a cornered animal. The slides kept changing, methodically, brutally. The second statement, the third, and then the final slide, the scripture verse in giant, damning letters, "Wherefore by their fruits ye shall know them." The murmur erupted into a roar of shock and outrage. Phones were out everywhere, people recording the screens, recording Elijah's horrified face. The ushers had stopped in the aisles, the offering plates forgotten in their hands, their mouths hanging open. "This is a lie," Elijah finally roared, his voice cracking. "This is a satanic attack. A fabrication from the pit of hell, designed to stop God's work." But his denial was drowned out by the evidence, glowing on two 10-foot screens for everyone to see. The fruits of his labor were not souls saved or children ministered to. It was 1.2 million Swiss francs in a secret bank account. Then a new voice cut through the chaos. A calm, steady voice. It was Albert. He had stood up from his seat in the third row. "Pastor," he said, his voice amplified by years of teaching Sunday school, "I think you owe this congregation an explanation. As the former treasurer of this church, I formally request that you turn over all financial records for the Prosperity Project, LLC, for an immediate independent audit." All eyes turned from Elijah to Albert. In that moment, the power in the room shifted decisively. It flowed away from the man in the expensive suit on the stage and toward the quiet, unassuming pensioner in the pews. Elijah just stared at him, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no words came out. The charade was over, the mask had been ripped away, and there was nothing left but the raw, ugly greed beneath. He looked at me then, his eyes full of a venomous, dawning comprehension. He knew it was me. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat, I just held his gaze, my expression calm, and let him see the truth in my eyes, the truth he had tried to silence. He broke first. He turned, stumbled off the stage, and fled through a side door, the sound of the congregation's angry, betrayed cries chasing him out into the daylight. The performance was over. The aftermath was every bit as chaotic as Albert had predicted. The service dissolved into a flurry of panicked conversations, anger, and tears. But Albert, true to his word, took charge. He got up on the stage, took the microphone, and calmly asked everyone to take a seat. He, along with two of the longest-serving deacons, men who looked ashen-faced and utterly betrayed, promised a full investigation. They scheduled an emergency all-church meeting for that evening. My nephew had done his job perfectly. The images on the screen were now seared into the collective memory of the congregation. People were huddled in groups, showing each other the pictures they had taken on their phones. The proof was undeniable, and it was viral. That evening, the church was more packed than I had ever seen it. There was no music, no sermon, just a grim-faced Albert standing at a simple lectern, a box of financial files next to him. He explained what they had found in the few hours since Elijah had fled. The pastor's office was cleaned out. His computer's hard drive was wiped. He was gone, but he had been sloppy. He had left behind old church bank statements that showed the large wire transfers to the Prosperity Project LLC. Albert had already been on the phone with the regional authorities of our church denomination. A formal investigation was being launched. He had also spoken to a lawyer who advised him to contact the district attorney's office first thing Monday morning. I sat in my pew and listened. I felt a profound sense of sadness, but also a quiet, clean feeling of rightness. This wasn't a victory. It was a painful, necessary surgery. We had cut out a cancer before it could kill the entire body. In the weeks that followed, the full story emerged. Elijah had a history. He had been run out of two other churches in other states for financial irregularities, but had always managed to leave before a formal investigation could take root. He was a predator who moved from flock to flock. The Prosperity Project was his retirement plan, a final massive score before he disappeared for good. The Swiss bank account made it clear he never intended to build a single thing. The church was wounded, deeply. Some people left, their faith in organized religion shattered, but most stayed. They were hurt and angry, but they were not broken. The community, the real church that lived in the hearts of its people, began the slow, painful process of healing. They gathered for prayer, not for fundraising. They held potluck dinners, not slick presentations. They started talking to each other again, rebuilding the bonds of trust that Elijah had tried to sever. Martha got her money back. Albert and the new board discovered that her check, along with several others from that final miracle offering, had been deposited into the LLC's domestic account, but hadn't yet been wired to Switzerland. They were able to freeze the account and return every last penny to the rightful givers. The day I told her, she hugged me and cried not for the money, but out of relief. Her faith, she told me, wasn't in Pastor Elijah, it was in God and in her friends. And that faith had been rewarded. As for me, I didn't face any backlash. In fact, the opposite happened. People came up to me, grasping my hand, thanking me for my courage. They apologized for shunning me, for believing his lies. I simply told them, we protect our family, and they understood. It was never about revenge. Not really. When I sit here today, in my quiet house, I don't feel a thrill of victory. I feel a deep, quiet peace. I did what I had to do to protect my home, my husband's legacy, and the people I love. Elijah's greed was the weapon, but my faith was the shield, and my nephew's particular set of skills, well, that was the sword. Sometimes we are called to be gentle as doves, but other times we must be wise as serpents. Pastor Elijah made the grave mistake of thinking this old woman was only a dove. He forgot that even the gentlest creatures will fight to the death to protect their nest. My faith in God was never shaken, but my faith in men who claim to speak for Him has been forever tempered by the fire of this experience. A church is a house of God, but it is built and run by men, and men, as I now know all too well, can be broken, or in this case, they can be exposed. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it serves as a reminder to always question those who demand your faith, but refuse to earn your trust. If you've ever felt taken advantage of by someone in a position of power, please share your story in the comments below. It's important for us to know we are not alone. And please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of everyday people finding the strength to stand up for what is right.